The rain in Lusaka fell so hard it felt like the sky itself was angry. Amelie clutched her small handbag as Kato, the man she had given her love and trust to, shoved her out of his car. The slam of the door echoed in her ears, followed by his cruel words, "You're nothing without me." Then the tires splashed water as he sped away, leaving her standing alone in the storm. Her phone was dead, her clothes clung to her skin, and her heart felt heavier than the rain pouring down. She looked around, hoping someone would stop, maybe offer help, but the few people passing by only stared and hurried off, pretending not to see her pain. Shame burned through her more than the cold. Kato had gotten exactly what he wanted, to break her spirit, to leave her humiliated on a lonely road with no way out. Amelie took a shaky step forward, the mud sucking at her shoes, and wondered how her life had fallen apart so quickly. Once, she had believed Kato's promises, believed he was her protector and partner. Now she was soaked, stranded, and betrayed. She whispered to herself through trembling lips, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I really am nothing." The storm drowned out her voice, but the ache inside her was louder than thunder. In that moment, she felt truly invisible, like no one in the world would ever come for her. She didn't know that everything was about to change. Amelie dragged her tired feet through the muddy road, the rain hitting her face so hard she could hardly see. She pulled her thin jacket tighter, though it was useless against the storm. Every step toward the bus stop felt heavier, not because of the water in her shoes, but because of the memories flooding her mind. She tried to push them away, but they came back sharper than the lightning splitting the sky. Years ago, she had turned her back on the life her uncle had offered her. He was wealthy, respected, and had promised to take care of her after her father's death. But he was cold, always reminding her that she was an obligation, not family. She craved love more than riches, so when Kato came with his big dreams and sweet words, she chose him. She thought his ambition would shelter them both, that together they could build something real. But Kato's love turned into something darker. At first, it was little lies. Then it was money missing, excuses about investments and opportunities. She gave him her savings, believing in him more than she believed in herself. In the end, he gambled it all away. Not just her money, but her trust, her faith, and now, tonight, her dignity. The man she had chosen over everything pushed her into the storm like she was trash, like she was nothing. She stumbled as a wave of weakness washed over her. Her hair stuck to her face, her hands trembled as she clutched her handbag, the only thing she had left. Her voice cracked as she whispered into the storm, "Maybe he's right. Maybe I really am nothing." The sound was swallowed by the thunder, but inside, her heart screamed louder than the sky. For a moment, she wanted to give up, to sit on the cold ground and let the rain wash her away. But her legs kept moving, almost against her will, carrying her toward the bus stop. Her body was soaked, her spirit broken, yet something deep inside refused to let her fall. She remembered being a little girl, her father lifting her up when she tripped, his voice gentle but firm, "Amelie, you're stronger than you think." That memory was like a tiny flame in the storm, weak but alive. She held on to it, though Kato's voice tried to drown it out. "You're nothing without me," he had said. But why did her father's words still echo, even after all these years? Amelie wiped her tears with her wet sleeve, though they blended with the rain. Her body shivered, but her heart beat on, stubborn and defiant. She didn't know where she was going or how she would survive, but she kept walking. The storm pressed her down, memories cut her like glass, and Kato's betrayal burned in her chest. Still, she moved. She thought she was alone, but fate was already preparing something she could not yet see. Amelie's steps grew slower as the storm raged harder, her thin body shaking from cold and exhaustion. The streetlights flickered above her, throwing long shadows on the empty road. Each crack of thunder made her flinch, and the sound of rushing water in the drains reminded her how quickly she could be swept away. She thought she was completely alone in the world, abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love her. But the world had other plans. Just as her knees began to buckle, bright headlights cut through the wall of rain. The beams were strong, steady, and blinding, forcing her to raise a weak hand to shield her eyes. A sleek black Range Rover rolled to a stop, its tires splashing water just inches from her. The powerful engine hummed like a promise of safety, something she hadn't felt in years. Her heart pounded. Who would stop for her, drenched and broken on this forgotten road? Slowly, the tinted window lowered, and through the blur of rain, a familiar face came into view. Amelie's breath caught in her throat. It was Kwame Ndlovu, her late father's closest friend, a man she had not seen in so long that he almost felt like a ghost. Time had only sharpened him, his jaw strong, his presence commanding. Even in the storm, he looked like a man who carried power wherever he went. His eyes, sharp and searching, moved over her trembling frame. There was no pity in them, only a deep concern that felt heavier than words. Amelie's lips parted, but no sound came out. She didn't know if she should cry or run. All her shame, all her pain from Cato's betrayal, rushed back at once. Would Kwame see her as weak? Would he see her as nothing, the way Cato did? But Kwame's voice broke through her doubts, deep and steady, carrying over the roar of the rain. "Get in, Amelie." Just 4 words, but they hit her like thunder in her chest. She had heard that voice before, years ago, at her father's funeral, when Kwame had promised he would always look out for her. She had been too young, too lost in grief to believe it then. Yet now, in the middle of the storm, here he was, keeping that promise. Amelie froze, her soaked shoes stuck in the mud. For a moment, she wanted to refuse, afraid to let anyone see her in this broken state. But something in Kwame's tone left no room for doubt. It wasn't just an offer, it was a command wrapped in care. She took a shaky breath, pulled her bag closer to her chest, and stepped toward the car. The door swung open with quiet force, the warmth of the leather interior spilling out like a shelter from the storm. She climbed in, dripping water onto the spotless floor, her heart racing with fear and fragile hope. As the door shut behind her, the rain seemed distant, and for the first time that night, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. Amelie sat shivering in the soft leather seat, her wet clothes sticking to her skin, unsure if this was real or just a dream brought on by exhaustion. The warmth of the car wrapped around her like a blanket, but it couldn't calm the storm inside her chest. She turned slowly, her eyes resting on the man beside her. Kwame Ndlovu. She remembered him from her childhood, always standing a little apart at family gatherings, never loud, never demanding attention, but always watching. She used to think of him as a shadow, someone who appeared when her father was alive and then disappeared after the funeral. She never knew that he hadn't left her at all. He had simply kept his promise quietly, like a ghost guardian. Kwame's hands gripped the steering wheel with a calm that wasn't really calm. His jaw was tight, his eyes forward, and though he said nothing for a moment, the weight of his silence filled the car. Amelie studied him carefully. He wasn't just the kind family friend she once knew. He carried something more now, something heavy and commanding. The world spoke his name with respect. A billionaire philanthropist, a man whose influence stretched across countries, whose businesses touched lives everywhere in Africa. People saw him as untouchable, a leader, a king in his own right. But tonight, he wasn't dressed in polished suits or carrying the calm smile the cameras loved. Tonight, he was in black, his shirt clinging to his broad frame, his face sharp with anger that the rain could not hide. Amelie's heart twisted. Was that anger for her? Or for the man who had thrown her away like nothing? She lowered her eyes, ashamed of how broken she looked. But before her thoughts could sink deeper, Kwame finally turned to her. His gaze was steady, burning with a quiet rage that wasn't directed at her but for her. She could feel it, like a shield wrapping around her, daring the world to touch her again. "You should never have been out there," he said, his voice low but edged with steel. It wasn't blame, it was pain, disappointment that she had been left to suffer. Amelie wanted to speak, to explain, but her throat tightened. All she managed was a weak nod, her tears mixing with the raindrops on her face. Kwame exhaled slowly, forcing control back into his body. He had been patient for years, keeping his distance out of respect, letting her choose her own path even when it led her into Kato's arms. But patience had its limits. Kato's betrayal, his cruelty, was the final straw. The shadow who had watched silently was no longer in the background. Tonight, Kwame was here in full, not just as her father's friend but as her protector, ready to show the world that Amelie was not alone and never would be again. Amelie sat quietly in the warm leather seat, her hands shaking as she held her small handbag close to her chest. The storm outside roared, but inside the car, everything felt heavy and still, like the air was holding its breath. Kwame pulled out his phone and spoke only a few words, his tone calm but sharp, the kind of voice that made people obey without question. He didn't raise it, didn't shout, but the authority in it was enough to send a shiver down Amelie's spine. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and kept driving through the rain with eyes focused on the road ahead. She didn't understand what he had just set in motion, but her heart told her it was something far bigger than she could imagine. Minutes later, through the rain-smeared window, Amelie saw bright lights in the mirror. At first, she thought it was just another car, but soon she realized it wasn't just one. Two black SUVs appeared, moving smoothly behind them like shadows that had been waiting all along. Their engines hummed in unison, their headlights cutting clean lines through the storm. They didn't honk, didn't rush. They simply followed, close and steady, like bodyguards in the night. Amelie's breath caught. This wasn't chance, this was Kwame's world, a world where power moved silently, a world where loyalty showed itself not in words but in presence. Only a mile ahead, Kato sat in his car, grinning at the thought of his mistress waiting for him. He had left Amelie broken in the rain, certain she would crawl home alone, humiliated and forgotten. But as he adjusted his mirror, his smirk froze. The glare of headlights pierced the storm, and his chest tightened when he realized the lights were not random cars, they were moving together, closing in on him like hunters. His fingers slipped on the steering wheel, his confidence melting as quickly as his smile. Kato's heart thudded painfully as he counted them. 1. 2. 3 cars, all dark, all sleek, all moving with purpose. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape route, but there was none. The rain was heavy, the road slick, and the black convoy moved with a precision that left no gaps. Panic clawed at his throat as the truth sank in, Amelie wasn't abandoned anymore. She wasn't standing alone in the storm. She had been claimed, pulled back into a circle of protection that he could never touch. For the first time, the power shifted. Kato, who had always enjoyed making Amelie feel small and helpless, now felt his own body tremble. His smirk was gone, his hands shook on the wheel, and the confidence he wore like armor cracked under the weight of headlights that promised consequences. In that moment, Kato understood, the girl he left to drown in the rain was no longer his victim. She was under the shadow of someone far greater, and he was the one left stranded in fear. The rain poured harder as Kwame slowed the car to a stop, the black SUVs halting behind them like silent guards. Amelie's chest tightened as she watched him push the door open and step out into the storm without hesitation. Water immediately drenched his dark suit, but he didn't flinch. His tall frame cut through the rain like steel, every step heavy with purpose. The sound of the downpour, the thunder, even the wind seemed to quiet around him, as if the night itself recognized his authority. Amelie leaned forward, pressing her hand to the window, her breath fogging the glass. She had never seen anyone move like that, so steady, so unshaken. Up ahead, Kato sat frozen behind his wheel, his bravado slipping with every second. He had always been the one in control, the one sneering, the one with the final word. But now, seeing Kwame stride toward him, drenched but unbending, Kato's confidence cracked like glass. His hand reached for the ignition, but before he could make a move, shadows appeared from the SUVs. Men in dark coats stepped out one by one, forming a silent circle around him. They didn't touch him. They didn't have to. Their presence alone was a prison, their calm movements more terrifying than violence. Kwame stopped in front of Kato's car, his eyes piercing through the windshield. He didn't shout, but his voice carried over the storm, deep and sharp, slicing through thunder. You left her in the storm. The question was simple, but it weighed heavier than judgment itself. Kato's throat went dry. He fumbled with words, stammering half-sentences, excuses that sounded weak even to his own ears. I didn't mean to, she was, but his voice dissolved under the strength of Kwame's gaze, swallowed by the rain and the silence of the men surrounding him. Inside the Range Rover, Amelie's hands stopped shaking. For so long, she had been the one trembling, the one begging for understanding, the one made to feel worthless. But now she watched the tables turn before her eyes. The man who had humiliated her, who had pushed her into the storm like she was nothing, now sat cornered, stripped of all his arrogance. Kato's shoulders slumped, his fingers twitching nervously against the wheel. His eyes darted around, looking for a way out, but every shadow reminded him there was none. For the first time, Kato looked small. Not the powerful boyfriend who had once controlled her life, not the man who had enjoyed her pain, but a fragile figure trapped by his own cruelty. Amelie's chest rose with a strange new feeling, strength. She wasn't cold anymore. She wasn't broken. Watching Kwame stand tall against the storm while Kato shrank into fear made her realize the truth, she was not the powerless one in this story. And as Kato's pale face pressed against the glass, she knew he finally understood it too. Amelie sat in the car, her heart still racing from what she had just witnessed. Outside, the rain hammered the world, but inside, time felt suspended. Kato sat trapped in his own car, pale and shaking, while Kwame returned with slow, steady steps, water dripping from his shoulders as though even the storm itself bowed to him. He slid back into the driver's seat, his face calm but his eyes burning with something Amelie had never seen before, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and determination. She braced herself for words of comfort, maybe even a plan to get her home safely. But instead, Kwame reached behind him and pulled out a thick black folder. He placed it gently on her lap, his large hand steadying it as though it carried more than just paper, it carried her future. Amelie stared at it, confused, her fingers trembling as she flipped the cover open. Inside were neatly stacked documents, official seals glinting under the dim light of the car. Her eyes moved quickly, her brain struggling to catch up. Property deeds. Share certificates. Bank statements. It was too much to understand at once, yet each page screamed of wealth, security, and power. Amelie's throat tightened as she turned to Kwame for an explanation. Your father left more than memories, Kwame said softly, his deep voice carrying both truth and comfort. He left you a legacy. I promised him I would keep it safe until you were ready. And now, Amelie, it's yours, completely. His words broke through her like sunlight piercing a storm. Amelie's breath caught. All these years she had thought she was poor, dependent on Kato, forced to endure his insults because she had nothing. She had believed his cruel words when he told her she was worthless, that she brought nothing to the table, that without him she was nothing. But here, in her hands, was proof that she was not only something, she was everything he could never be. Through the rain-streaked window, Kato caught sight of the folder in her lap. His eyes widened, his jaw dropped open as if the ground beneath him had been ripped away. He recognized the seals, the names on the documents. This was real. This was powerful. And it belonged to Amelie. For once, Kato had no insults, no excuses, no mocking laugh. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His world was crumbling before him as Amelie's rose higher than he could ever reach. Everything he had bragged about, money, success, importance, was nothing compared to what Amelie now held in her hands. And worse for him, he could do nothing to stop it. Amelie pressed her trembling hand over the folder, feeling its weight not just in paper but in meaning. For the first time in years, she felt whole. She wasn't just the girl left in the rain. She was her father's daughter, a woman with strength, dignity, and power. And Kato could only watch as the truth shattered him. The rain kept falling, drumming on the hoods of the black SUVs, but Amelie no longer felt the cold. Kwame's hand rested gently on her shoulder as he pulled her close, his voice steady, calm, and unshakable. "You're never alone, not while I breathe," he whispered, and those words sank deep into her soul, filling the cracks Kato had left in her heart. For the first time in years, Amelie felt seen, valued, and safe. She clutched the folder to her chest, not just as proof of her inheritance, but as proof that she was never the nothing Kato had made her believe. Engines roared to life, a low thunder rising from the convoy that waited like loyal guardians. Amelie slid back into the car beside Kwame, her wet hair clinging to her face, but her eyes now glowed with a quiet strength. She didn't tremble anymore. She didn't feel broken. She was stepping into a future Kato could never touch. Outside, Kato stood frozen in the storm. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked at the man he could never intimidate, at the empire he could never match, and at the woman whose dignity he could never steal. The cocky smirk that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a pale, hollow fear. His hands shook on the wheel, powerless, useless, as the taillights of the convoy cut through the darkness. Amelie didn't glance back. She didn't need to. The chapter with Kato was over. The storm could rage all it wanted, but inside that car, she was finally dry, finally safe, and for the first time in her life, completely untouchable.